Whitney Houston was at the absolute pinnacle of her career. Her rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner at the Super Bowl had become the definitive version of the national anthem. The Bodyguard soundtrack was about to make her the biggest star on the planet. She was selling out arenas in minutes, and her face was on every magazine cover in America. But on a cold Tuesday morning, something happened that the media never discovered, something that revealed the real woman behind the golden voice. Whitney Houston walked into Temple University Hospital wearing sunglasses and a simple coat, asking to visit the pediatric cancer ward. What she did during the next 6 hours would leave doctors in tears, change the life of a dying nurse, and prove that true greatness has nothing to do with record sales. If you're ready to discover the Whitney Houston that the world never knew, the woman who used her gift not for fame, but for healing, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story will show you what it really means to be a legend. To understand why Whitney's hospital visit was so profound, you need to know about Sarah Chun. Sarah was a 34-year-old oncology nurse at Temple University Hospital who had dedicated her entire adult life to caring for children with cancer. She had chosen pediatric oncology specifically because of her own childhood trauma. When Sarah was 8 years old, her younger brother Tommy had died of leukemia, and the nurses who cared for him had been the only source of comfort during the most devastating period of her family's life. Sarah had promised herself that she would become that source of comfort for other families going through the same nightmare. Back in 1991, Sarah had been working in pediatric oncology for 12 years. She had held hundreds of children's hands during their final moments. She had comforted countless parents who were watching their babies fight battles that no child should ever face. And she had never once broken down in front of a patient or family member, no matter how much her heart was breaking inside. Sarah's colleagues called her the Iron Nurse, not because she was cold, but because she seemed to have an infinite capacity to absorb pain without letting it destroy her. What they didn't know was that Sarah had developed her own method for processing the trauma of her work. Every single night after a shift ended, Sarah would drive to a parking lot overlooking the Schuylkill River, and she would sing. Sarah had always loved singing. As a child, before her brother got sick, she had dreamed of being a professional vocalist. Her mother used to tell her that she had the voice of an angel, and her church choir director had encouraged her to pursue music seriously. But when Tommy died, something inside Sarah changed. She felt guilty about wanting to sing when her brother would never get the chance to do anything again. So she buried her dream and chose nursing instead, using her voice only in private moments when she needed to release the emotions she couldn't express any other way. The problem was that lately, Sarah's voice wasn't working anymore. For the past 6 months, every time she tried to sing, her throat would seize up. The notes that used to flow effortlessly would catch and break. She had seen doctors who told her there was nothing physically wrong with her vocal cords. The issue was psychological. She was experiencing what they called conversion disorder, a condition where emotional trauma manifests as physical symptoms. Her body was literally refusing to let her sing because her mind couldn't process any more grief. Sarah was terrified. Singing in that parking lot had been her only outlet, her only way to survive the emotional weight of her job. Without it, she felt like she was drowning in accumulated sorrow with no way to come up for air. On November 12, 1991, Sarah arrived for her shift at 6 in the morning, exhausted from another sleepless night spent trying and failing to sing. She had started having panic attacks, wondering if she would ever get her voice back, wondering if she could continue doing her job without her one source of emotional release. As she walked through the hospital corridors toward the pediatric oncology ward, Sarah had no idea that her life was about to intersect with Whitney Houston's in a way that would change both of them forever. Whitney Houston's decision to visit Temple University Hospital that morning wasn't planned. She was in Philadelphia for 3 sold-out shows at the Spectrum, and she had the day off before her final performance. Her usual routine on days off was to sleep late, do vocal exercises, and prepare mentally for the next show. But that morning, Whitney woke up at 5 a.m. with an overwhelming feeling that she needed to go somewhere, do something that had nothing to do with being Whitney Houston the superstar. The night before, Whitney had performed to 18,000 screaming fans who treated her like a goddess. After the show, she had returned to her hotel suite alone, and despite the adrenaline and excitement of the performance, she felt profoundly lonely. This was the paradox of Whitney's life at the peak of her fame. She was surrounded by people constantly, managers, assistants, security guards, band members, but she rarely felt truly connected to anyone. Everyone wanted something from her. They wanted her voice, her time, her energy, her perfection. Nobody seemed interested in just being with her as a regular person. Whitney had been thinking a lot about her mother, Whitney Houston, and the stories Whitney used to tell about singing in church when Whitney was little. Whitney always emphasized that their gift of singing wasn't just for entertainment or fame. It was a ministry, a way to bring comfort and hope to people who were suffering. Somewhere along the way to superstardom, Whitney felt like she had lost touch with that original purpose. She was selling millions of records and winning every award imaginable. But when was the last time she had used her voice to help someone who really needed it? That's why Whitney called her assistant at 5:30 that morning and said she wanted to visit a hospital. Not for a publicized charity event with photographers and reporters, but quietly, privately, just to spend time with people who were going through difficult times. Her assistant was confused and concerned. Whitney had 3 security people, a tour manager, and a record label executive who would all need to be notified and coordinated. But Whitney was insistent. No entourage, no cameras, no publicity, just her visiting people who needed hope. By 7 a.m., Whitney was walking through the main entrance of Temple University Hospital wearing jeans, a simple black coat, and sunglasses. She had convinced her assistant to let her go with just one security guard who agreed to wait in the lobby. Whitney approached the information desk and asked which floor needed visitors the most. The elderly volunteer at the desk looked at this beautiful woman with a warm smile and directed her to the 6th floor, the pediatric oncology ward, where children were fighting cancer and could always use some extra cheer. Whitney took the elevator to the 6th floor, her heart racing with nervousness. She had done thousands of performances in front of massive audiences, but somehow this felt more intimidating. These weren't fans who wanted her autograph. These were sick children and exhausted medical staff who had real problems that her fame couldn't solve. As the elevator doors opened, Whitney took a deep breath and walked toward the nurse's station, where Sarah Chun was just beginning her shift. Sarah was reviewing patient charts when she heard an unfamiliar voice say, "Excuse me, I was wondering if I could visit with some of the children this morning." Sarah looked up from her paperwork and found herself face to face with one of the most famous women in the world. For a moment, Sarah's professional composure almost failed her. She had grown up listening to Whitney Houston's music. She had Whitney's albums at home. And now here was Whitney Houston standing at her nurse's station at 7 in the morning, asking to visit the cancer ward. Sarah's first instinct was to assume this was some kind of publicity stunt, a photo opportunity that would be splashed across newspapers the next day. Celebrity hospital visits were common. And while they were usually well-intentioned, they often felt more about the celebrity's image than genuinely helping the patients. But something about Whitney's demeanor was different. She wasn't wearing designer clothes or professional makeup. She looked tired, almost vulnerable. And she was alone, which was unusual for a star of her magnitude. "Are you here with a film crew or photographers?" Sarah asked, her voice careful and professional. Whitney shook her head. "No, just me. I don't want any publicity or attention. I just wanted to spend some time with the kids, if that's okay." Sarah studied Whitney's face, looking for signs of insincerity, but finding none. "Most of our patients are very sick," Sarah explained. "Some of them are in their final days. It's not easy to spend time here. Are you sure you're prepared for that?" Whitney's response surprised Sarah. "I'm not prepared at all," Whitney admitted. "But I think that's why I need to be here. I spend all my time in this bubble of fame and success, and I've lost touch with what really matters. I just want to do something real today, something that isn't about being a celebrity." There was such genuine vulnerability in Whitney's voice that Sarah felt her professional skepticism melting away. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This was a woman searching for meaning beyond her fame. "Okay," Sarah said, "but I have some rules. First, no promises you can't keep. Don't tell a child you'll come back to visit if you're not certain you can. Second, no pity. These kids get enough of that. Treat them like normal kids, not sick kids. And third, this will be harder than you think. Are you ready for that?" Whitney nodded. "I'm ready. And thank you for letting me do this." As Sarah led Whitney down the corridor toward the first patient room, She had no idea that this woman would end up saving her life in a way that had nothing to do with money or fame. The pediatric oncology ward at Temple University Hospital had 28 beds, and on that November morning, 26 of them were occupied. Sarah decided to start with 8-year-old Marcus Thompson, a little boy who had been fighting acute lymphoblastic leukemia for 2 years. Marcus was scheduled for a bone marrow transplant in 3 days, and he was terrified. His parents had explained the procedure to him multiple times, but he remained convinced that he was going to die during the surgery. He had stopped eating, stopped talking, and spent most of his time staring at the ceiling with tears running down his face. When Sarah and Whitney entered Marcus's room, the little boy didn't even look at them. His mother, Angela Thompson, was sitting in a chair beside his bed, looking as exhausted and defeated as her son. "Marcus," Sarah said gently, "I brought someone to meet you." Marcus didn't respond. Angela looked up at the newcomers, and her eyes widened slightly when she recognized Whitney Houston, but she was too tired to show much reaction beyond mild surprise. Whitney walked slowly to Marcus's bedside and sat down in the chair next to Angela. She didn't try to force Marcus to look at her or interact. She just sat quietly for a moment, looking at this little boy who had clearly given up hope. Then Whitney began to hum. It wasn't a recognizable song, just a gentle, soothing melody that seemed to fill the room with warmth. Marcus's eyes flickered toward the sound, the first sign of interest he had shown in days. "My mama used to hum to me when I was scared," Whitney said softly, still humming between words. She said music is like medicine for the soul. It can't fix everything, but can make the hurt feel a little bit lighter. Marcus turned his head slightly to look at Whitney. "Are you famous?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Whitney smiled. "Some people know who I am. But right now, I'm just someone who came to hang out with you, if that's okay." What happened over the next 45 minutes was pure magic. Whitney didn't perform for Marcus. She talked with him. She asked about his favorite video games, his pet dog at home, the things he missed most about his life before cancer. And slowly, gradually, Marcus began to open up. He told Whitney about his fear of the bone marrow transplant, about how he had dreams where he was being buried alive, about how he didn't want to be brave anymore, because being brave was exhausting. Whitney listened to every word with complete attention, never interrupting, never trying to minimize his fears or offer false reassurance. When Marcus finished talking, Whitney said something that Sarah, watching from the doorway, would never forget. "Marcus, being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. Being brave means feeling scared and doing the hard thing anyway. And you know what? You don't have to do it alone. Your mama is going to be there, the doctors and nurses are going to be there, and I'm going to be there too, in spirit. And whenever you feel really scared, I want you to remember that somewhere in the world, I'm thinking about you and sending you strength." Then Whitney did something extraordinary. She asked Marcus if he wanted to hear a song, a special song that nobody else in the world had heard before. Marcus nodded, and Whitney began to sing. Not one of her famous hits, but a gentle lullaby that she said her mother used to sing to her. Her voice, that incredible instrument that had sold millions of records, filled the small hospital room with such beauty and tenderness that Angela Thompson began to cry. Sarah, standing in the doorway, felt tears streaming down her own face. And Marcus, who hadn't smiled in weeks, closed his eyes and smiled. After spending nearly an hour with Marcus, Whitney continued through the ward with Sarah as her guide. Room by room, child by child, Whitney gave each patient her complete attention and presence. She didn't rush, didn't check her watch, didn't act like she had somewhere more important to be. To 5-year-old Emma Rodriguez, who had lost all her hair from chemotherapy and refused to let anyone see her without her hat, Whitney took off her own sunglasses and showed Emma the exhaustion in her eyes. "Sometimes I don't want people to see me either," Whitney confessed. "Sometimes I want to hide because I'm tired of being looked at. But you know what I learned? The people who really love us don't care what we look like. They see who we are inside." Emma, encouraged by Whitney's vulnerability, slowly took off her hat. Whitney gently ran her hand over Emma's bald head and said, "You're beautiful, Emma. Not despite the cancer, but because of how strong you've been fighting it. That's real beauty." For 12-year-old David Washington, who was angry at the world for giving him osteosarcoma that required the amputation of his left leg, Whitney shared her own struggles with the pressure of perfection. "Everyone expects me to be perfect all the time," she told David. "Perfect voice, Perfect appearance, perfect performance. But I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I have bad days. I have moments when I want to give up. The pressure of other people's expectations can feel like a prison. David, who had been withdrawn and hostile to everyone since his diagnosis, looked at Whitney with new understanding. "How do you deal with it?" he asked. Whitney's answer was honest. "Not always well. Sometimes I hide behind my fame. Sometimes I pretend everything is fine when it's not. But talking to you right now is helping me remember what's real and what matters. So thank you for that." As the morning turned into afternoon, Whitney showed no signs of wanting to leave. She read stories to the younger children, played card games with the older ones, and simply sat and held hands with the kids who were too sick to interact much. Sarah watched in amazement as this global superstar transformed into something more important, a source of genuine comfort and connection for children who desperately needed both. But Sarah also noticed something else. With each room they visited, with each child Whitney connected with, Sarah could see the weight lifting from Whitney's shoulders. The superstar who had walked onto the ward that morning looking tired and burdened was gradually being replaced by a woman who seemed more alive, more present, more herself than perhaps she had been in years. This wasn't charity work for Whitney. This was healing work, and it was healing her as much as it was comforting the children. Around 2 in the afternoon, Sarah and Whitney took a break in the nurse's break room. Whitney had been at the hospital for 7 hours, visiting every single child on the ward, and she looked exhausted but genuinely happy. "Thank you for letting me do this," Whitney said to Sarah. "This has been one of the most meaningful days of my life. These children are so brave, so real. They've reminded me of something I've forgotten." Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from Whitney. "What do they remind you of?" she asked. Whitney was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "They reminded me that my voice isn't really mine. It's a gift I'm supposed to share, not to make myself famous or rich, but to bring light into dark places. Today felt like the first time in years that I've used my voice the way it was meant to be used." That's when Sarah did something she hadn't planned to do. She told Whitney about her own voice, about how she used to sing, about how she had lost the ability after years of witnessing so much suffering and death. She told Whitney about her brother Tommy, about the guilt she felt for surviving when he didn't, about the conversion disorder that had stolen her only outlet for processing grief. "I haven't been able to sing a single note in 6 months," Sarah confessed, her voice breaking. "And I'm terrified that I'll never get it back. Without singing, I don't know how to survive this job. I don't know how to survive all this death." Whitney reached across the table and took Sarah's hands. "Sing with me now," she said. Sarah shook her head. "I can't. I've tried hundreds of times. My throat just closes up." But Whitney was persistent. "We're going to sing together. I'll start, and you just join in whenever you feel ready. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 women singing together." Whitney began to sing Amazing Grace, her voice soft and gentle, filling the small break room with its beauty. Sarah sat frozen, her throat tight with fear and emotion. But something about Whitney's presence, about the safety and acceptance in her eyes, made Sarah want to try. At first, only a small, broken sound came from Sarah's throat. But Whitney kept singing, kept holding Sarah's hands, kept looking at her with encouragement and understanding. And slowly, gradually, Sarah's voice began to join Whitney's. It was shaky and imperfect, catching and breaking on some notes. But it was there. Her voice was coming back. By the time they reached the final verse, Sarah was crying and singing simultaneously, her voice growing stronger with each word. When the song ended, Sarah looked at Whitney in disbelief. "I sang," she whispered. "After 6 months, I actually sang." Whitney was crying too. "You did. And it was beautiful." What happened next at Temple University Hospital that day has never been publicly reported until now. Whitney asked Sarah if she could visit with the nursing staff, the doctors, and the support workers who dedicated their lives to caring for these children. Sarah gathered everyone who could take a break, about 15 people total, and they crowded into the hospital's small chapel. Whitney stood before these exhausted, emotionally depleted caregivers and spoke from her heart. "I came here today thinking I would give something to the children," Whitney said, "but they gave me so much more than I could ever give them. They reminded me of what really matters. And Sarah here reminded me that sometimes the people who help others the most are the ones who need help themselves. Whitney then did something extraordinary. She asked each staff member to share the hardest part of their job, the thing they carry home with them every night. One by one, these medical professionals opened up about the cumulative trauma of watching children die, about the guilt they felt when they couldn't save everyone, about the toll it took on their own families and mental health. Whitney listened to every story with complete attention, validating their pain and thanking them for their service. "You're all heroes," she said. "Not because you're perfect or because you save every life, but because you show up every day knowing how hard it's going to be, and you do it anyway, because these children need you." Then Whitney sang for them, not a performance, but a prayer in the form of music. She sang Greatest Love of All, but the way she sang it that day was different from any recording or concert performance. She sang it as a message specifically for these caregivers, a reminder that learning to love yourself and take care of your own heart is essential if you're going to help others. When she reached the line, "I believe the children are our future," every person in that room was crying. These are people who live that belief every day, who sacrifice their own emotional well-being to give children a chance at a future. After the song, Whitney made a commitment that she kept secret until her death. She established a private fund through her foundation to provide mental health support and counseling for pediatric oncology workers at Temple University Hospital. She never publicized this, never used it for tax benefits or positive press. It was simply her way of giving back to the people who had reminded her of her purpose. Dr. James Morrison, the head of pediatric oncology, later revealed that Whitney's fund had provided therapy and support for hundreds of medical professionals over the years, helping them process trauma and avoid burnout. Whitney Houston saved lives that day, Dr. Morrison said. Not just the children she visited, but the caregivers she supported who might have left the field without that help. Before Whitney left the hospital that evening, she returned to Marcus Thompson's room one final time. Marcus was sleeping, and Angela was sitting beside his bed holding his hand. "He smiled today for the first time in weeks," Angela whispered to Whitney. "You gave him hope." Whitney kissed Marcus gently on the forehead and pressed something into Angela's hand. It was a private phone number. "If Marcus needs me before his surgery, call this number any time, day or night." I meant what I said. He's not alone. 3 days later, at 6 in the morning, Angela called that number. Marcus was being prepped for surgery, and he was terrified. Whitney answered on the second ring and stayed on the phone with Marcus for 20 minutes, singing to him, talking to him, reminding him of his strength. Marcus went into surgery calm and peaceful. The transplant was successful, and today Marcus Thompson is a healthy 29-year-old man with children of his own. The impact of Whitney's visit extended far beyond that single day. Sarah Chun found that her voice had fully returned after singing with Whitney. But more than that, the experience had given her a new perspective on her work. She realized that she had been so focused on protecting herself from pain that she had stopped allowing herself to feel joy. Whitney had shown her that you can't selectively numb emotions. If you shut down grief, you also shut down love and connection. Sarah began allowing herself to celebrate the victories, to bond with families, to feel the full range of emotions that came with her work. She became an even better nurse because she was finally fully present with her patients instead of emotionally armored against them. The other staff members who met with Whitney that day experienced similar transformations. The fund she established allowed them to process their trauma in healthy ways, and the culture of the entire pediatric oncology ward shifted. They began having regular debriefing sessions where staff could share their struggles without judgment. They created a support system that recognized the emotional toll of their work and provided resources to address it. The rate of burnout and turnover in the department decreased significantly, which meant better continuity of care for the children. For Whitney herself, that day at Temple University Hospital became a turning point. In interviews years later, when she was struggling with addiction and personal demons, she would often reference that morning as one of the purest, most meaningful experiences of her life. "I felt like myself that day," she told her close friend Robin Crawford. Not Whitney Houston the star, just Whitney, a woman using her voice to help people. "That's who I want to be." The experience influenced her music as well. Her subsequent performances of Greatest Love of All and other songs carried a deeper emotional weight because she had reconnected with their original meaning. Several of the children Whitney visited that day have spoken about the lasting impact of her presence. Emma Rodriguez, who is now a social worker specializing in helping children with cancer, says that Whitney's visit taught her that vulnerability is strength. She could have just shown up, taken some photos, and left, Emma said. But she stayed all day. She cried with us. She let us see her as a real person. That taught me that the best way to help people is to be authentic with them. David Washington, who lost his leg but went on to become a Paralympic athlete, credits Whitney with helping him understand that limitations don't define us. She was honest about her struggles with perfection and expectations, David recalled. That gave me permission to be imperfect too, to focus on what I could do instead of what I had lost. The story of Whitney's secret hospital visit remained largely unknown during her lifetime. A few nurses mentioned it in local interviews, but without any photos or publicity materials, the mainstream media never picked up on it. Whitney preferred it that way. This wasn't about her image or her brand. It was about using her gift in the way it was meant to be used, to bring comfort and hope to people who needed it. When Whitney Houston died in 2012, Sarah Chun was one of the people who spoke at her memorial service. She told the story of their meeting for the first time publicly, explaining how Whitney had given her back her voice and reminded an entire hospital ward what it meant to care for others while also caring for yourself. Whitney Houston was a voice, Sarah said. But more than that, she was a heart. And on one November morning in 1991, she used both to heal people that the world will never know about. That's the Whitney I want everyone to remember. Not just the superstar, but the woman who understood that true greatness means showing up for people when there are no cameras, no applause, no recognition. Just human beings helping human beings. This beautiful story reminds us that the most powerful performances are often the ones that happen off stage, in quiet hospital rooms, with audiences of one. Whitney Houston's greatest gift wasn't just her voice. It was her understanding that fame and talent mean nothing unless we use them to lift others up when they're at their lowest. What would the world look like if we all used our gifts, whatever they are, to bring light into someone's darkness? How can we show up for people who need us without expecting recognition or reward? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that we all have the power to change lives through simple acts of genuine compassion. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because we have more incredible untold stories that show the real hearts behind music's greatest legends. Until next time, remember that your greatest performance might be the one that nobody else ever sees except the person who needs it most.